I had been walking for hours in the pouring rain, every street looking the same, and I didn't know where to turn. I felt hopeless, soaked to the bone, until a car pulled up and a voice said something I'll never forget. "I'll protect you." I woke up that morning feeling the weight of everything before my feet even touched the floor. The kind of tired that isn't just sleepiness, it's the kind of exhaustion that sinks deep into your bones and makes every small task feel like climbing a mountain. Work had been relentless this week. Endless emails, phone calls, deadlines that seemed to multiply overnight. And I was just scraping by, trying to keep everything together while feeling like I was slowly unraveling. Even the simple things, like making breakfast or folding laundry, felt like a burden. I sipped my coffee, barely tasting it, my mind already running ahead to the errands I had to run later. By midday, the sky had started to look strange, gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a little drizzle wouldn't be so bad. But as the afternoon wore on, the clouds thickened, and a damp chill crept into the air. I had a list of errands I couldn't ignore. The grocery store, the pharmacy, dropping off a package. It all felt so ordinary, so mundane, yet somehow heavier today. Each step I took outside felt a little slower, my bag weighing me down as much as the thoughts in my head. I was aware of my own tension, the constant hum of stress in my chest, the feeling that I was running on autopilot and couldn't catch up to myself. There were little frustrations piling up too, the kind that seem silly but add to the weight. The bus was late, the line at the checkout stretched forever. A stranger bumped into me without so much as an apology. I felt invisible, overlooked, almost like the world was moving around me while I was stuck in my own quiet chaos. And yet, I kept going, because that's what you do. You keep moving, even when every step feels like it's dragging you down. By the time I left the last store, the sky had turned a deep, oppressive gray. The wind picked up, whipping the trees and scattering leaves along the empty sidewalks. Rain began to fall in soft, tentative drops at first, then faster, heavier, until I could barely see a few feet ahead. The streets, once crowded with people, now seemed deserted, eerie in their emptiness. Every puddle I stepped in soaked through my shoes, cold water seeping into my socks, and I realized just how exposed I was, how alone it felt out here. My heart started to pound, a nervous flutter that made me glance over my shoulder more times than I could count. I felt disconnected from the world around me, like I was moving through a different reality, one where help wasn't coming, and I was completely on my own. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore, it was inside me too, that gnawing sense of uncertainty and fear that seemed to grow with every drop of rain. I tried to keep moving, telling myself I just needed to find a familiar street, a sign, anything that could lead me home. But the rain seemed determined to erase every landmark, every clue I usually relied on. The more I walked, the more lost I felt, like the world had shifted while I wasn't looking. My shoes squelched with every step, socks soaked, clothes clinging to my skin, and my hair plastered to my forehead. I kept wiping water from my eyes, but it only made the world blur even more. Every turn I took felt wrong, every street a mirror of the last, and a sinking panic started twisting in my chest. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my phone was nearly dead, and even if I could get a signal, who would answer? I was embarrassed to admit I couldn't find my way home. I was supposed to have it together, supposed to know where I was going, but there I was, shivering, tired, and utterly lost. Each shadow that moved along the empty sidewalks made me jump. Every distant car horn made my heart race. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was being silly, but the fear only grew. The streets were empty, silent except for the relentless drumming of rain, and I realized how fragile I felt in that moment, like I could disappear into the night and no one would notice. I remember thinking about all the little frustrations earlier in the day and how trivial they now seemed compared to this. The bus being late, the long checkout line, none of that mattered anymore. This was bigger. This was raw and real. I was alone, and the storm was mocking me, drenching me in a cold, relentless reminder that I couldn't control everything. My thoughts raced, spinning from one worry to another. What if I got sick from being soaked? What if something worse happened out here? Each step forward felt heavier than the last, my body aching, my spirit worn thin. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, leaning against a slick metal pole for support, wishing the rain would stop, wishing for a sign of life, any kind of guidance. The streetlights reflected in the puddles like tiny suns, but they only emphasized how empty and unfamiliar everything around me had become. I wanted to scream, to cry, to release all the tension coiling in my chest, but the rain swallowed every sound, leaving me in silence. And yet, even as fear gnawed at me, a small part of me refused to give up. I told myself I had to keep moving, had to keep looking, even if every step felt like walking through an endless maze. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My mind kept replaying the same question. How had I ended up here, completely alone in this storm? I felt every emotion at once: fear, frustration, exhaustion, and a strange, aching hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would appear, someone who would make this night end differently. I didn't know it then, but I was about to meet someone who would change everything, someone who would turn my fear into safety in a way I never expected. I was beginning to wonder if I'd ever find my way out of that maze of rain-soaked streets when a soft glow of headlights appeared in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another car passing by, but as it drew closer, it slowed, and then it stopped beside me. I froze, my soaked clothes clinging to me, hair plastered to my face, and instinctively took a step back. My heart was pounding, a mix of fear and disbelief. Who stops for someone like me, stranded in the middle of nowhere in this storm? The window rolled down, and a voice, calm and warm, cut through the pounding rain. "Are you okay?" it asked. Just three simple words, but they made me shiver in a way that wasn't just from the cold. I looked up and saw him, a man in a crisp coat, looking almost untouched by the storm, like he belonged to a different world entirely. There was something in his eyes, a steady kindness, a quiet confidence that made it hard to look away. I wanted to say no, to refuse help like I always do when I feel vulnerable, but I couldn't. My exhaustion had broken down my defenses. I I can't find my way home, I admitted, my voice shaking as the words barely escaped. The rain dripped from my hair into my eyes, stinging like little needles, and I brushed it away. He nodded like he understood more than I could say and opened the passenger door. "Come on," he said simply. "Get in. I'll get you somewhere safe." I hesitated, glancing around at the empty streets, my mind racing through all the warnings I'd been given my entire life about strangers. But something in the tone of his voice, in the calm assurance of his presence, made me step forward. I climbed into the car, dripping water onto the leather seats, and immediately felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was warm inside, dry, and quiet except for the soft hum of the engine. For the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe without the cold rain stabbing at me. He didn't ask a million questions or make small talk to fill the silence. He simply drove, his hands steady on the wheel, and every now and then he'd glance at me, making sure I was okay without making it obvious. I found myself studying him, noticing the way his eyes softened when he smiled, the way he seemed genuinely present, like he wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. like this moment mattered as much to him as it did to me. I wanted to ask who he was, why he cared, but I didn't. The words stuck in my throat because part of me didn't want to ruin the fragile sense of safety I'd found in the car. The rain continued to fall, pounding against the windshield in relentless sheets, and the streets outside looked like a world turned entirely gray and liquid. Yet inside the car, it felt almost magical. His voice would occasionally break the silence, soft and reassuring. "We'll get you home. Don't worry. I'll protect you." And every time he said it, something inside me shifted, a trembling relief, a flutter of hope I hadn't felt in years. I realized I hadn't just been lost in the streets. I had been lost in the storm of my own life, and for the first time, someone was steering me toward safety. Even as I sat there, soaked and shivering, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you know deep down that someone has seen your vulnerability and still chooses to stay. I didn't know his story, and I didn't need to. All that mattered was this: in the middle of the storm, in a moment that could have been terrifying and lonely, someone was here for me. And in that instant, everything else faded: the fear, the exhaustion, the endless gray rain outside. I realized I was no longer completely alone. The moment I settled into the car, I felt an almost immediate shift. The warmth of the interior wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time in hours, I felt the weight of the rain and the cold lift, if only slightly. The steady hum of the engine, the rhythm of the windshield wipers, and the soft splash of tires through puddles became almost hypnotic. I stared out the window, watching the storm rage outside, feeling like I was moving through two worlds at once: the chaos beyond the glass and the calm cocoon of this car. I was quiet at first, unsure what to say. It felt strange to talk to someone I didn't know, someone who had just appeared like an answer to a silent prayer. But he didn't push me. He didn't make me feel awkward for my silence. There was a patience in him, a quiet understanding that sometimes words aren't necessary. Every so often, he'd glance at me, a flicker of warmth in his eyes, and I found myself relaxing just a little. The fear that had been clawing at my chest all night began to loosen, replaced by a cautious sense of trust. "Where are you headed?" he finally asked, his voice soft but steady, like he was more concerned about my comfort than getting an answer. "Home," I murmured, almost ashamed of how uncertain I was. I didn't even know the route anymore. Everything looked different under the rain, every street the same. "Then that's where we'll go," he said simply, and the certainty in his voice was oddly comforting. There was no judgment, no rush, just a promise that he would get me there. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, a mix of relief and disbelief. Who does this? Who stops on a rainy night and offers not just a ride, but a sense of protection so profound that it seeps into your bones? As we drove, I let my mind wander, thinking about how quickly life can change in a single moment. One minute, I was lost and alone, struggling through the storm, convinced no one could help. The next, I was being carried through it, shielded from the worst of it, and the world didn't seem quite as cold and empty. I found myself stealing glances at him, noticing the calm way he handled the wheel, the way his jaw tightened slightly when he focused on the road, the way his presence filled the car with a quiet strength. I wanted to ask questions, so many questions: who he was, why he cared, what kind of life he lived, but there was a serenity in not knowing. There was comfort in letting this moment exist just as it was: two people in a car, a storm raging outside, and a fragile thread of safety connecting us. Every now and then he'd speak, small observations about the weather, a soft joke to make me smile, a reassuring comment that made my tension ease just a little more. And every time he said it, I'll protect you. It sank deeper into me, a truth I wanted to believe with every fiber of my being. I thought about all the times I'd felt alone in my life, the nights I'd walked home in fear, the moments when I'd longed for someone to see me and care without judgment. And now, in this car, drenched and shivering, I realized that sometimes the universe answers in ways you never expect. This stranger wasn't just driving me home. He was reminding me that trust, safety, and kindness still exist in the world, even when it feels like everything is against you. By the time the streets began to feel familiar again, a warmth lingered in me that had nothing to do with the heater in the car. It was the warmth of hope, of connection, and of the unspoken promise that I wasn't alone. Not tonight. Not anymore. By the time we slowed down near a familiar street, I realized I hadn't spoken much, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to put the mixture of relief, awe, and lingering fear into words. The storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle, yet inside the car, the tension I'd carried for hours had begun to melt away. I felt safer than I had in a long time. So safe, in fact, that I could finally let myself notice him without the cloud of panic hanging over me. He glanced at me just once, and that look, calm, steady, attentive, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. There was a depth there, a sense that he saw me not just as someone in need, but as someone who mattered. My thoughts tumbled over themselves. Why is he like this? Why does he care so naturally? And more importantly, why does it feel like I can trust him completely, even though I've never met him before? I'm glad you're okay, he said softly, almost as if he could read my mind. His words weren't just polite. They were sincere, filled with a quiet reassurance that made the world outside the car feel distant and irrelevant. I found myself exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours, letting go of a tight knot of tension I hadn't even realized I was holding. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel seen, to feel safe without skepticism, to feel something I hadn't dared to feel in a long while. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The car became a space where vulnerability wasn't frightening. I told him a little about my day, not all the details, but enough to explain the storm I'd been carrying inside me, the fatigue, the sense of being invisible in my own life. And he listened. Not just heard me, but truly listened. He nodded in the right moments, offered quiet words of understanding, and occasionally, a small smile that made me feel like I wasn't just a person in need of help. I was a human being deserving of care. I realized then that connection doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments, a steady hand on the wheel, an understanding glance, words spoken without expectation. There was no pressure, no judgment, no rush, just the feeling that someone had chosen in that exact moment to protect me, to guide me through the storm, and to see me in a way that few people ever do. As we approached my street, I felt a strange reluctance. I didn't want the moment to end. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I had tasted a kind of safety and understanding I hadn't known I was missing. There was something about the way he cared without needing to be asked, something about his quiet strength that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. And as he pulled up and turned the engine off, I realized that the storm had passed, not just outside, but inside me too. For the first time that night, I felt a spark of hope, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest moments, connection, and perhaps something more, can appear when you least expect it. I stepped out of the car and felt the cool drizzle on my skin. My clothes were still damp, my hair plastered to my face, but I didn't care. The storm had stopped raging in my chest, leaving behind a quiet, almost fragile sense of peace. I watched him as he closed the door, and for a moment, I wanted to say something more, something that could capture the weight of what just happened, but the right words didn't exist. How do you put into words the way someone makes you feel safe when you haven't felt it in years? I realized that I had been wandering not just through wet streets, but through my own exhaustion, fear, and doubt. Life had felt heavy, the world had felt indifferent, and I had carried all of it alone. And yet, here he was, a stranger in the rain, offering not just shelter, but protection, and maybe even something deeper, a sense that I was seen, that I mattered. I felt a warmth in my chest, a gentle glow that contradicted the damp chill of the night. It was the kind of feeling you don't anticipate, one that quietly shifts the way you see everything around you. I walked up the familiar path to my door, each step feeling lighter than the one before. The rain had begun to fade into the distance, leaving behind puddles that reflected the dim streetlights, and for the first time that evening, the world didn't feel threatening or overwhelming. I paused at my doorstep and thought about the kindness that had found me when I needed it most, how the universe had a way of answering in ways I could never predict. It wasn't just about being rescued from the storm outside. It was about being reminded that people can care, that trust can be earned, and that sometimes even the smallest gestures can change everything. As I turned the key in the lock, I reflected on the night as a whole. Every fear I'd felt, every step I'd taken through that endless rain had led me to this moment. It was a strange kind of gratitude, one that mingled relief with a newfound awareness of how fragile and beautiful life can be. I didn't know if I would ever see him again, or if our paths would cross, but I carried the memory of his presence like a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, hope exists. Standing in the doorway, I realized something profound. Storms, both literal and metaphorical, are temporary, they pass, and when they do, what remains is clarity, connection, and the quiet understanding that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. I closed the door behind me, letting the warmth of home envelope me, but the memory of that night stayed with me. The headlights cutting through the rain, the calm voice that promised protection, the inexplicable feeling that, even in my most lost moments, I was not alone. That night, I learned that being lost is not the end. It's an opening, a chance to be found in ways you never imagined. And I understood, more deeply than ever, that safety, care, and connection are sometimes waiting just around the corner, ready to appear when you least expect it. As I sit here, thinking back on that night, I can still feel the rain, the chill, and the overwhelming sense of being lost. But what stands out more than the storm is him, the stranger who showed up when I had nowhere else to turn, who offered protection without expecting anything in return, who reminded me that trust and kindness still exist in the world. That night wasn't just about getting home safely. It was about learning that even in our darkest, most vulnerable moments, hope can arrive when we least expect it. I want you to remember this. Feeling lost isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something extraordinary. Someone or something can appear to guide you, to see you, to protect you in ways you never imagined. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the unexpected ways life can turn around, of kindness that arrives when we need it most, and of moments that make us believe, even briefly, that the world isn't as cold as it sometimes seems.